And so the conversation continues on Business Edge, and this time we'll be looking at how saving South Africa's aviation industry can be achieved. Now, the liquidation of Comair has once again shined a spotlight on South Africa's aviation industry, from the issues with SSA, Mango, and now Comair. Now, what happens next for this industry, which is one of the most developed on the continent? So, on this segment, Derek Nseko, founder and CEO Airspace Africa, joins us to discuss this particular issue. Good morning to you, or good afternoon, if I could put it that way. Derek, thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure, and good afternoon.
Now, South African Airways, Mango, now Comair, all have financial issues. We understand that. While they are not the only airlines operating in South Africa, tell us, is this pointing to aviation crisis in South Africa as we speak?
Yeah, on the back of what's happened with Comair and its liquidation, it's safe to say that we're entering a very, very tricky period for the aviation industry in the travel market in Southern Africa. Comair has been a very important player in the industry. It's been key, especially domestically in Southern Africa, taking up a huge chunk of the available seats in the market. So based as well on the fact that coming out of the pandemic, and versus 2019, there's still a huge chunk of the seats that were available in the market that are still not yet there. So if you take away what Comair has been providing to the industry, there's a large chunk of capacity that has been taken away from the South African aviation market. Now, obviously, airlines, just like any other industry, airlines have a commodity that they sell, which is airline seats. And if you take away the supply, and what happens with the market dynamics is that definitely demand is going to go up, and we expect because of that demand naturally that prices of airline tickets are going to go up. So this is something that is definitely in the immediate term going to affect the South African aviation industry, especially the consumer.
So with Comair going through this liquidation crisis, how do you think it would affect passengers and even air travel in the country?
Yeah, like I said, the first effect that we're going to feel is the increase in ticket prices. I think it's very important for the players to come in, the other existing players who's talked about South African Airways, which itself is a shadow of its former self from 2019 and versus its post-business rescue structure. Mango is no longer with us, and we don't know what the future holds for Mango Airlines. But there's two significant airlines in the industry at the moment that are positioned to fill that gap. That is FlySafair and Airlink. Both of those airlines are very huge. In fact, Airlink at the moment has emerged out of the pandemic as one of the largest airlines on the African continent. It is the largest airline in sub-Saharan Africa. FlySafair is based on a low-cost model. But it's now spread its wings even beyond the South African borders this year, launching its Mauritius route. So these are both airlines that are hugely growing. FlySafair perhaps might be better placed at the moment to grab a large part of the market that needs to be taken up. They already have an order for a number of Boeing 737 aircraft, which they'll be hoping that can come much sooner than they had even hoped. Airlink has already been flirting with upgauging its fleet, and we don't know yet what their plans are in terms of increase of capacity. They are an all-Embraer airline, and most of their aircraft are not as large as the Boeing 737s that FlySafair flies, and even the 737s that Comair has been flying. So it will be interesting to see how the rest of the players in the market try to fill that void, because it's very huge and it's important for the market that is covered soon.
All right, so we understand that there have been issues of mismanagement when it comes to African Airlines. Our guest earlier, that is Pakamile, also echoed that. So we're wondering, when you look across the continent, which countries would you say are actually getting it right within their airspace that you think that Africans can learn from?
Yeah, and I mean, incidentally, to be honest, I do agree with a lot that Pamela was saying previously, but there's definitely a myriad of factors that have led to the demise of Comair. It's safe to say that Comair is one of the better, has been one of the better run airlines in the southern part of Africa. So if we're speaking about airlines that are poorly run, there's really so many others that we can speak about across the borders. And even in South Africa, as I mentioned, there is examples of airlines that are being run and very well, and that they are a glowing example for the market. I mentioned Airlink, which has grown immensely in the last 5 years. At the beginning of this year, Airlink was the largest airline on the continent in terms of capacity. Flights itself is growing well beyond the South African borders. So even just locally, before we even cross the borders, there's airlines to look at as examples of models. And you will note as well that these are privately run airlines. Across Africa, there's a glowing example. And I think that is an almost obvious example on the African continent in Fly Ethiopian Airlines, which, to answer your question, might actually be perhaps the only national flag carrier that I could mention as a really great example of an airline whose model is there to follow. And that is simply based on the fact that this airline is run like it is a private entity. It's run based on principles of private ownership rather than government ownership. And that is the difference.
Recent trends tells us that more collaborations with different airlines across the continent seems to be happening as of now. So tell us, do you think that Africa needs to approach the aviation business in a different manner so that we can get better results?
Yeah, I think what has been tried, tested, and proven right now is that most of the models that we are operating on the African continent are not working. Inherently, the airline sector in Africa is loss-making, save for a few examples like the ones that I mentioned. So, I mean, as Einstein says, I mean, if you do the same thing over and over again, that is really the definition of madness. So something certainly has to change. I'd like to think that the COVID pandemic has taught us so much. There's been a bit of a shift between some airlines, as you mentioned, towards partnerships and working together on the continent. That might be a way for us to go. Historically, we've had partnerships on the continent. Many of them have not worked out, but we can see from beyond our continent that partnerships are very important to success, especially with the economies of scale that are brought about by having larger airline groups. We already have one in Africa in Ethiopian Airlines, which already has its own existing model, trying to grow a multi-hub strategy and partnering up and buying equity into various airlines in Africa. So this year, obviously, we've had the news that South African Airways and Kenya Airways have put forward their intent to come together to form a Pan-African airline group. They've invited other airlines on the continent to join them. Specifically, they would like a West African partner for strategic reasons, obviously. And that might be a way to go in terms of building a resilient aviation sector in Africa. Knowing what has happened in the last few years, we don't know what other tremors will come into the industry. So we need to have large and resilient airlines on the continent.
Thank you so much, Derek, for joining the conversation.
Thank you for having me.
All right, so there you have it. Now you begin to wonder, because I know that definitely that when there is a business that is established, what is more important definitely is to have businesses, is to have services being rendered, and of course profits coming in for those kind of businesses. But then when you now look at the aviation industry and discover that they are going bankrupt to the point of liquidation, then you begin to wonder what the future of aviation is for Africa. Our guests have talked about I've talked about management issues, and of course they've talked about some other issues like that. Then you begin to wonder what can be done if there's a change that can come, and Tolu, what do you think can be done in this situation to ensure that we bring our aviation industry from a point of bankruptcy and liquidation to a point where they can fly and be a pride in Africa?
I just think the conversation has to continue. In that final question you asked, Derek, in terms of collaborations and mergers, that's something we definitely need to look at. We've heard there's renewed interest in countries having national airlines, but the actual examples and the histories of national airlines on the continent don't lead you to think that this is the time when countries need to be sinking that amount of investment into national carriers. So mergers and, of course, collaborations along the way are the ways to really go in this. And it's truly sad to see Air going down, especially when you look at the history of the company. As Pamikale said, there is still the potential. There's a little bit of a glimmer of hope if somebody will come forward and say that they want to take over the company and invest. But beyond that, this provisional liquidation that has started really seems to be the last road, or really the last round around the round for the airline.
All right, Solu, you can take it from here now.
All right, so we will be wrapping things up in just a bit. But before we do that, there was a massive breaking story for Nigeria yesterday. And that story involved the fight against corruption, as the country has continually said it is something that it's taking up. So a quick background now. American investment bank JP Morgan Chase has won a $1.7 billion London High Court lawsuit that Nigeria brought against it yesterday. And Nigeria brought that case about the company's role in a disputed oil field purchase. Now, the civil lawsuit, which was heard earlier this year, concerns Shell and Italy's Eni's purchase of Nigeria's offshore OPL 245 oil field. Nigeria claimed that JP Morgan was grossly negligent in transferring monies received by energy companies to an escrow account controlled by a business linked to the country's former oil minister, Dan Etete. According to Nigeria, the transactions violated JP Morgan's QuinsCare responsibility, and we found that a federal court, not federal, I beg your pardon, a London High Court on Tuesday disagreed with Nigeria and said that no such breach had taken place, and that was the ruling that came forth yesterday. So I believe that I have Okoluwa Dakpo Thomas joining me from London quickly to take us through a bit of the story in regards to this. Okoluwa, thank you so much for joining me. Welcome to Business Edge. Let's quickly get into this. Nigeria's case seemed to hinge on the QuinsCare expectations, like an expectation of duty of care. Can you take us into what that means in terms of financial institutions?
All right. Thank you for having me. The first thing is, there's a British law called QuinsCare duty. So it's a legislation that expects banks to honor or to look after the interest or preserve the interest of a customer in any transaction. So it was established in 1992 when Barclays had an issue with QuinsCare Limited. So this particular issue happened in 2011, where JP Morgan basically initiated a transaction to an oil and gas company, Malibu Oil and Gas Company, which was owned by Dan Etete. The transaction obviously was initiated by the Nigerian government, and it also had the signature of the country's Attorney General. And that's what JP Morgan brought in his defense, saying, yes, they suspected and they flagged the transaction to authorities, but they still ended up, making the payments anyway, because they looked at the beneficiaries and they looked at the initiators of the transaction and said, okay, the country's Attorney General is on this, and the Nigerian government is a Nigerian government transaction. So why aren't you? We can as well send this money. So, but what the Nigerian government is saying that JP Morgan basically has breached the QuinsCare duty, where they should have first sought to protect the financial interest of the Nigerian government. So before they made the transaction, they should have done their checks, their KYCs, to know who they were sending the money to. Because like I said, Dan Etete is a popular, a money launderer. He was the oil minister under General Sani Abacha, who gave him an oil block, which Nigeria has basically chased up and down to different countries. We still have an issue in Italy. So that's basically the idea of the QuinsCare duty.
Okay, so one part of this also is the fact that the judge noted that at the time of the 2013 payments, the bank was already on a notice. It had a notice of the risk of fraud, and the risk was there. But she says on the evidence, that there is no more than a possibility based on slim foundation. So even that small slim foundation, that small possibility of a risk and the risk notice that the bank already had, shouldn't that have been enough to give Nigeria some leeway in this case?
Well, the fact that the initiating, transaction came from the Nigerian government itself. So that's basically what JP Morgan is holding on to, saying this transaction had the signature of the country's Attorney General. And the Attorney General basically should be the pillar of justice, or basically the pillar of, legitimacy to any transaction. So I think the truth is that the Nigerian government right now is just clutching onto straws and exhausting all legal options, which obviously is they have a right to. But the truth is that this particular transaction had the authority and the backing of the government officials. So basically, this is a battle between the corrupt elements in the transaction. JP Morgan basically just being the payment subsidiary, intermediary. Yes, obviously should be negligible, but they've gone to prove their case, and basically you see that they've won it.
All right, so very quickly, I want a yes, no, or maybe answer to this, given the fact that you followed this case. Do you think that Nigeria was able to prove that fraud did in fact happen with this situation? Yes, no, or maybe?
It's a maybe. It's a maybe.
It's a maybe. All right. Yes. So let me ask my final question now. This is not the only lawsuit or the only case there is that's tied to OPL 245. A panel of judges in Milan actually acquitted Shell and Italy's Eni and their executives of bribery last March. And prosecutors say that they are, of course, appealing that ruling. But finally, for this, in this case, Nigeria says they're going to review very carefully and decide their next course of action. Do you think Nigeria has any recourse after this judgment from yesterday?
Yes, they do, because JP Morgan says they flagged the transaction to regulators. They said they flagged it. So the premise of, if you flagged it, then obviously you should have had the, you had the option to stop the transaction. So why didn't you stop it? So it's something they can review. There's a small hope, or there's a small glimpse of hope there. But the truth is that because of the elements involved in the transaction, it was a government, and that's why basically Nigeria obviously is chasing the former Attorney General as well, because obviously he probably benefited from the deal as well. So that is basically the strong case for JP Morgan here. All
right, Opoluwa Dapo Thomas, thank you for joining me. I'm sure we'll have you back sometime soon.
All right, well, thank you very much.
And the country says it is reviewing the judgment that was handed down by a London High Court yesterday involving that JP Morgan Chase lawsuit, and it will come forward with its decision. But it's another blow, particularly in the cases following the OPL oil field scandal and controversy. If you're not too sure about that, just look up Dawn Fortuna and you'll have a quick brief of how that all has played out. But the brief you have right now are the stories we're keeping an eye on. We also have Lekan joining me now to give you a quick look at NC4 to watch.
Yes, on NC4 to watch, to start by telling you that local electricity meter assemblers have been dealt a blow after their quest to challenge a decision by Kenya Power that locked them out of a 2 billion Kenyan shilling tender, which was dismissed because it was found out of time. The Public Procurement Administrative Review Board dismissed the application filed by 4 local companies, stating that companies moved to the board late. And away from that, millers will be shipping in at least 1.5 million 90 kilo bags of wheat in the next 10 days as they rush to replenish the diminishing stocks amid poor crops locally from the current season. According to the port of Mombasa, 4 ships carrying bulk wheat will be docking at the harbor by Sunday next week. They will be among the 35 vessels that are expected to dock at the port between the 13th and 25th of June with different cargo. According to a statement, the strategic partnership between the companies focuses on the West African civilian market, excluding the military. In essence, civil customers in Nigeria can now contract directly with Aviation Limited, who will be offering sales, servicing, and support for helicopters in the West African region. The statement added. The Chief Executive Officer, Aviation Limited, Segun Demire, noted that EAN has been at the forefront of business aviation development in Nigeria for over a decade. And finally, European countries scrambling to secure alternatives to Russian coal imported 40% more coal from South Africa's main export hub in the first 5 months of this year than over the whole of 2021. Figures obtained by Reuters news agency. The Netherlands imported 1.27 million tons of coal from the terminal in March, April and May. France's coal imports from RBCT jumped nearly 7-fold from just 68,005 tons over the whole of last year to 464,432 tons so far this year. And Spain imported 355,250 tons, Poland 181,515 tons, while Germany imported 157,383 tons. And that's it on NC4 to watch. Tolulope takes it from here.
Thank you so much, Lekan. Thank you always, as much as possible. We like to say that, for joining us today. Follow us on social media. We're at News Central TV. And of course, you can point us in the direction of a business story that you think we should also put our eyes on. And you can download our mobile app, subscribe to our YouTube channel, and watch us on the platforms we are available. Remember, right here on Business Edge, we put African business, the economy, and finance front and center, and also give you a bit of that international business that you crave. That's it for us today. Thank you so much for joining us. At the top of the 12 o'clock hour, West African time, is News Central Now. I'm Tolulope Adeleru Balogun. Have a fantastic day.